just waiting for you.
Hey everyone, Victor Lucia here, founder and president of Brooklyn Fishing Club, the #1 fishing club on the planet. Joined today by visiting our updated website, brooklynfishingclub.com. We have new apparel for sale, an ice fishing tournament coming up, and more benefits for club members in 2020, including access to one podcast episode per month that will only be available to members. Thanks for tuning in to episode 18 of the Brooklyn Fishing Club podcast. Shout out to everyone who's been listening, supporting us. Shout out to all of our amazing members, our followers and supporters across the world. We would not be able to do this without you. Today I have a very special guest in the studio, author Fred Waitzkin, author of Searching for Bobby Fischer, The Last Marlin, and more. Today we'll be discussing his new book, Deepwater Blues, going over some fishing stories from his life and more. Fred, thank you for joining us in the studio today.
Victor, it's delightful to be here with you, and I'm excited, particularly excited about this interview, because I've given a bunch of interviews about the new book, which is my baby. I love this book, but this is a fishing audience, and fishing is my big passion, so this is really cool.
Yeah, man, thank you for coming. Before we get into talking about the new book, I just want to say how honored I feel to be sitting here with you. My dad gave me a copy of your book, The Last Marlin, when I was probably a freshman in high school, and it became one of my favorite books ever, second only to The Old Man and the Sea. And when you messaged me on Facebook about the new book, Deepwater Blues, I couldn't really believe it at first. You mentioned, I think in the first message, that you were the author of Searching for Bobby Fischer, but I didn't in the moment put it together that you also wrote The Last Marlin. I was like, okay, let me Google him real quick. And then I was like, oh my God, expletive. Called my dad at work. I'm yelling into the phone in my office. I'm like, Dad, you'll never believe this. Author of Last Marlin just messaged me. He wants me to read his new book. I was going off. So, yeah, man, my dad wanted to say hi. He wanted to say thank you for writing that book. It struck close to home for both of us in regards to the way fishing and family are intertwined in our lives. So before we get in the new book, I got to ask you a couple questions about that one, because I know
Well, firstly, I'm greatly moved by that, and hi to your dad.
Thank you.
Yeah, that book is will always be very close to my heart. My son, by the way, Josh, thinks that's my best book. I mean, I never have clarity about that. For me, it's always like the last book is the best book.
You're only as good as your last hit, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
So what was the writing process for that one like? Because I know that was like a very personal book for you.
It was really interesting because I knew that I wanted to write a memoir. I had very unusual parents. My dad was a lighting fixture salesman, but a really great one. He in the 50s and 60s when there was a building boom in New York City, he just lit the city up with lighting fixtures. He was a charismatic salesman, a sickly guy, but a charismatic salesman, and he was really great at selling fixtures. He did a lot of bad things and he did a lot of good things, but I loved him like crazy. And my mom was an artist. She was an abstract painter and then later on a sculptress, and she's quite well known in her own right. Her work is in a lot of museums, and my parents were such powerful influences in my life. In fact, when I'm asked who were your great literary influences, and people think I'm going to say Ernest Hemingway or Lawrence Durrell or Henry Miller, and these cats really were important to me and are important to me. But really, my parents were my greatest literary influences because they were such unusual people and they were such violent opposites. My father was a business person and a fisherman, and my mother was an artist, and she abhorred fishing and abhorred business. And somehow I came out of the middle of those two. So they've given me material for writing for my entire life. I think when I think back on The Last Marlin, I think maybe the part about it which interests me the most conceptually is that, like, when I sat down to write it, I thought, well, this will be a snap, because I'm writing about my life. If I'm writing another novel and I don't know background material, I have to go to Brazil or the Bahamas to study it. That's challenging in a certain way. But my life, I know my life. You know your life, Victor. We know our lives. So I sat down to write about this material that I knew so well, and I thought I could just handle it tenderly and, and in depth. And I realized after I got into it that that there was a lot I didn't know, and that, like, to put out a boating metaphor, writing the book was sort of like traveling on the ocean from one marker, one buoy, to the next, and you'd know how to get from let's say Point Judith to Montauk Point, right? But then, you might not know exactly how to get from Montauk Point to Cox's Ledge, and you figure, well, how am I going to do that? And then you ask some people that you know, or some relatives that might still be alive, and you still don't know exactly. And then you dream about it and you think about it, and then finally you come up with an answer. And so you can get from Montauk Point to Cox's Ledge. But then reflectively, afterwards, you start to think, but is that really how you went? And what you come to understand when you write a memoir is that, to some degree, it's a little bit like writing fiction, because you know certain things deeply inside you, but other things you're just guessing about, because you really don't know how to get from all the points to all the other points. You forget a lot of things. So you kind of reimagine them. And in the reimagining process, it's a kind of creative process. And actually, when it comes down to it, it doesn't really matter whether it exactly happened or it didn't matter. Who the hell cares? Whether or not, you steered 210 degrees or 240 degrees. As long as you made it come alive and it was true to the essence of the way you feel about your life. So that's one thing about the book. What else would you like to know?
Was it therapeutic to write it? Did it feel good to write it, or was it were there moments of pain where you were forced to think up these memories where
Good question.
you might have put them away?
In both ways, in both respects. I loved writing about my dad particularly, who I've always adored, and it allowed me to reimagine some of the scenes that were haunting me on a slightly less than conscious level. Like, I remembered the smell of the sheets in his bed, when I was a kid, when I was 8 or 9 years old. And he was a salesman. He was often away traveling. I would crawl into his bed and I would smell his sheets. And after I was working on the book for a while, I could smell what the sheets were like, even though it was like many years before.
That's amazing.
And on the other hand, the pain. I mean, like, my mother was a huge literary influence upon me. I mean, she taught me about color and juxtaposition, and she read to me stories when I was growing up, and she always encouraged me to be a writer. And one of the things that she taught me to do was to write from the heart, to write truly. And so I wrote from the heart, and I wrote truly. But when she read the book, it upset her.
It was too true.
It was too true. So I did what you told me, Mom, and then you got angry at me.
Still wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, that book, man, what an epic book. And then Deepwater Blues, you sent me a copy. When I finally got the chance to sit down and read it, I was thinking, I'll read the first few chapters and go to bed. Ended up reading the whole thing, and one night I could not put it down. I mean, between the characters, the setting, the conflicts the characters are going through, I was completely enthralled. And another thing I really liked about it was the illustrations, which were just great. One that sticks out in my mind is the illustration of the tuna that got bit in half. I like that one a lot. So it's based on a true story, correct?
Yeah. Well, let me just say something about that. The illustrations. Although he doesn't like the word illustrations, he refers to them as drawings or paintings. But illustrations is fine. Were done by an artist friend of mine named John Mitchell, who lives in Brooklyn, and he'd never fished before. But we were buddies, and we talked a lot about the creative process, and I invited him to come on this crazy trip, which I'll describe to you in a minute or so. And he drew everything that we saw. Well, not everything that we saw, but he drew things that engaged him along the way. And it was a sort of an interesting thing to do, because, like, in the 19th century, when Dickens was writing novels, those books were often illustrated. If you think about Treasure Island, for example, which maybe you read when you were a kid, right? the drawings of Wyeth illustrate that book. And then, in recent times, that sort of fell out of fashion. But it seemed like a cool idea to have drawings accompanying the text. And John is a very smart guy, and he did beautiful work. He's a great artist.
Definitely.
But what was your question about the truth of the story?
Yeah, because it's based on a true story, right?
Yeah.
So how much would you say is true? How much is imagined?
That's a great question. I sort of had this idea. Okay, first of all, let me go back and tell you a little bit about it. I started. I have this old boat. It's a 42-foot Hatteras. It's, I don't know, built in 1977. It's like a member of my family. I baby it. I keep the engines going over the years, and I've been fishing in it significantly with my family for years, and we became a really tight marlin crew. I mean, blue marlin is the fish of my love, and I started fishing for blue marlin before I owned the boat with my dad, and then when I got my own boat, I started fishing for blue marlin, and we would travel to like distant islands in the Bahamas, where there were a lot of these fish. Because even by let's say 80, it was hard to catch blue marlin. You'd have to go a long way to find them. I mean, you could fish off Miami for blue marlin for 30 years and not catch one, But if you go to islands in the southern Bahamas, you can still catch them. And so we used to travel to these islands, and it was basically my daughter, my son, my wife, and myself. And we got really good at it. I mean, as an amateur crew, we were probably one of the best. I mean, one season, in 2.5 weeks, caught 23 blue marlin, which is a lot of blue marlin to catch in a short period of time. And some of them were incredible. We can get to some of those marlin stories down the road if you're interested. But along the way, I discovered this island called Rum Cay. It was gorgeous. It was physically beautiful. It was lush green. It was a little mountainous, and most Bahamian islands are flat. And on the southeast corner of it, there was a tiny little marina, a really soulful place with a restaurant where the food was fantastic, and it was run by this guy by the name of Bobby Little, and he's a very charismatic guy. He was an incredible womanizer. He was a great cook. He did sculptures of fish. He was a mechanic. He was a builder. He was a great talker. He was a bullshit artist. He was great to be around, and kind of like everybody in Southeast Florida that was in the fishing world sort of knew about Bobby Little, and boats would travel down there to go fish. It was a long way from Florida, but boats would travel to fish there for a few days because it was so great to be around him. And like a lot of famous people would go down there, like the hockey player Mark Messier used to fish out of there, and Jackie Onassis traveled to the island with her last boyfriend a couple times, and there were all sorts of celebrities there. But it was a fishing place, and it was a soulful place, and there were only like 50 or 60 people living on the island, and they were kind of cool people. I mean, they were all funky and interesting and soulful. Not all of them, but a lot of them, and the fish were everywhere. I mean, you could walk on the yellowfin tuna off the southeast point. I mean, like every afternoon they came up, and oh my God, 60 and 70 pounders, and these are powerful fighters, and blue marlin. I mean, you could catch a blue marlin almost every day, or certainly in a week you catch 3 or 4. And so I tried to get down there whenever I could. Every 2 or 3 years I'd get down there, and then at one point, a terrible event took place. A tragedy took place right off the island, close to the island, where, without telling exactly what happened, because maybe we'll have some readers here. I don't want to, give away everything that happens in the book. It'll kind of take the drama away. But a lot of people died. A lot of people died tragically, and it kind of like put a pox on the island. The tourists stopped coming. The island became less friendly. There was a lot of jealousy that developed, and ultimately, really terrible things happened in the island. Murders, land takeaways, It became a lawless place. So, like, I wasn't there physically on the island when this kind of spiritual turn took place, but I'd been on the island like a few years before. And when I heard about the kinds of things that happened, this place that was like a heaven to me, like a Valhalla, had transformed into a place where lawless, murderous things were taking place. It started to occur to me that this was a story I had to write. Because, my writing is often described as inherent in my writing, and maybe in a lot of good writing, is juxtaposition. I mean, you unless you want to write fairy tales, it's not all happiness and greatness. There's always the tug between God and the devil. In a lot of good writing. And when I saw this place, which I loved so much, turn in this dark way, I thought this was something that I needed to explore. And so, I invited a couple of friends of mine, including the painter John Mitchell, to travel to Rum Cay, with the idea that I would do some research, and then see if I could write this book. And the trip itself, this particular trip itself, turned out to be harrowing. I mean, very, very scary and disturbing and exciting and interesting things happened on the boating trip that I hadn't bargained for. One reason being that I was traveling with an inexperienced crew. My family is an experienced crew. My wife is the navigator. My son runs the boat and navigates, and he's a deckhand. My daughter is a marlin fisherman. I mean, but all of a sudden I had myself and 3 greenhorns on the boat. And so there were a lot of challenges getting down there, and we got into trouble. I mean, we almost got eaten by sharks one day. I mean, like, a lot of crazy stuff happened.
Can we hear that story?
Yeah, should I tell you that?
Yeah.
Okay, so on the way down, there's a little island right off the coast of Cat Island called Conception Island. It's gorgeous. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful places you'll ever see in a lifetime. And we were traveling south, heading to Rum Cay, and we anchored for the night off Conception Island. And everyone was hot and exhausted from the trip, and we decided we'd take a swim. I guess it was John. No, I think it was my friend Duran Katzman, and he dove into the water, and he came running out of the water and said, "A shark is chasing me." And I said, "Man, there's no sharks chasing you. I mean, I've been swimming in these waters for 25 years. I mean, you see a shark occasionally, but no sharks chase you." I said, "This is just a fantasy that you've created." So, I dive in, and I roll over on my back, and I'm enjoying the sun and the bliss of being in this beautiful water. And all of a sudden, I roll over, and I see a lemon shark, about 150 pounds, coming at me with his mouth wide open. And he's roaring up at me it's shallow water, it's just 25 or 30 feet. And he's coming straight up at me. And everybody in the boat can see this also, because it's like, it's perfectly clear. They're saying, "Get out of the water, get out of the water." So I dive, I sprint for the dive ladder. I grab a hold of it, and the shark grabs my fin. So he grabs one of my fins, and he's got it in his mouth, and everybody says, "Get on the boat, get on the boat." And I'm trying to get the fin off and get on the boat. And I got on the boat, and I didn't get bit by the shark. But those sharks stayed behind the boat, circling all night long. I mean, we were telling stories that night on the boat, and every 3 or 4 hours we'd go out and we'd turn on the lights outside, and there were these 5 lemon sharks circling the boat, waiting for dinner. So that was like one of the things that happened on the trip
Wow.
on the trip down.
Close call.
Yeah.
But you made it down there.
We made it down there, and then it was spooky. I mean, I arrived at the island, and I described to you before the way it was like this pristine, gorgeous place. It was green. It was lush. It was beautiful. There was this beautiful place, commodious place with great food, and without telling the whole story, I mean, we pulled in. We came in at dusk, and to get to the marina, you have to wind your way through coral reefs. And in the dark, I didn't dare do that. But I worked my way into shore, and I dropped the hook. and we figured we'd spend the night, and then in the morning we'd worry about how we're going to get into the marina. And we woke up in the morning, and we looked at the shore, and nothing was green anymore. Everything was brown, and all the trees were gone. It looked a little bit like someone had dropped an atom bomb on the island. And then, just to the west of where the boat was anchored, there was a cemetery, a little local cemetery that was right next to the beach. And one of my friends was looking at it with binoculars. He said, "Fred, take a look at this." And I looked at the cemetery, and all I saw were bones sticking up from the ground. Thigh bones and ribs and skulls, and holy shit. I mean, this was like, this. If there was such a thing as a cursed place, this place had the look of a cursed place. And then, I finished the research that I needed to do, and I think it's an exciting, beautiful, and harrowing, upsetting, and exhilarating story all at once. And I think that I don't want to tell the plot of the whole story to your prospective readers, but I think that anyone that loves the water or loves fishing or loves that environment, or frankly speaking, anybody that likes a good read will like this book.
Totally agree. Definitely. I'm going to ask you about one part.
Sure.
If you want us to edit it out after, I can. But was that part about the dogs true, what they did to his dogs?
Sadly, it was true.
That was fucked up.
Yeah, it was fucked up.
I love dogs.
Yeah.
That was tough to read.
A lot of people have said that to me.
And,
I wondered if I should leave it out, but,
But then what happened after that was exciting.
It was hard to leave out. Yeah.
He did that really happen after he lost them? He went to that guy's place and...
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't really want to tell the specifics of the story, but but if any of you guys have read Deliverance by James Dickey, that's kind of before your time, but it was a great novel, and it was made into a wonderful movie starring Burt Reynolds, and there's scenes in it where the protagonists have to survive in the jungle while they're being hunted, and life is hanging by a thread in those scenes. And I think the scenes in my book are similar to that, what you're alluding to. But I don't really want to tell the story.
Yeah.
I think it's a shame to give that away. But I think
I had to ask.
I think the story evolves into a great adventure at the end.
Absolutely. I think from start to finish, because the tragedy mentioned, it's at the beginning of the book, right?
Right.
When all the famous people and tourists are on the island, and that actually happened? There was like a party going on when that happened?
It actually happened.
That's wild.
Yeah.
And that scared them, right? That was like the beginning of the first domino, kind of, right?
Before moving, we can ask more questions about this book if you want to, but before moving past it, just one little, I don't know, how should I put this? One thing that's sort of charmed me about the book is I had no idea what the reception of this book would be. I mean, it's a short novel. It's only 140 or 150 pages long. And there are so many books out in the world today that it's very hard to make a mark with a book. But actually, my book made #1 on the bestseller list in Amazon among sea stories. And I've never had number one Amazon book before. I mean, Searching for Bobby Fischer was #1. So that was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you feeling good? Are you working on anything new now? Or are you?
My son lives in Central America, and with his family, he has a beautiful place down there, and he's also a writer and a speaker, and he's a great person. And I travel down there a lot to visit with him and his family, and my wife lives down there a lot of the year, and there's a story that I'm investigating down there. I'm just at the beginning of it. I'm just sort of like, for me, because I spent, maybe in part because I spent 10 or 12 years of my career doing journalism. I worked for a lot of the big magazines. And so reporting has become part of my process. So I like to, like in a previous novel called The Dream Merchant, the last third of it takes place in Brazil. And also it's very, very exciting. And I would never have dreamed of writing it without going and spending 5 weeks in the Amazon, which is what I did, because I don't think you can make these things come alive and have them feel real if you don't know them, So I've been scouting out this scene, in Central America that could turn into a book.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Yeah.
Can't wait to hear more about that.
Also fishing in that scene too.
There's got to be.
Got to be.
Got to be. Come on. Let's talk a little bit about the characters. Was it tricky because some of them are based on real people?
Was it tricky? I don't know. I had this idea that it would be very cool to start a book with real characters like myself and John Mitchell and Duran Katzman and James Roll, who also traveled with me. He's my best friend in the Bahamas. He's a guy that lives on Bimini, and he came on the trip with me, and Bobby Little, and then bring them into a world that is partially fictive, so that you have a kind of merging of fiction and nonfiction. Now, what would it be like to take real people and introduce them to a world that's at least somewhat fictional, and the cast of characters that are not real, and see how they would intersect, if it would work or not. And I think it came out. I'm not talking about like from your perspective as a reader, but as a writer, I enjoyed doing that. I'd never done it before quite like that, and it was an interesting process.
So when you guys went down, at that time you almost got eaten by the shark.
Yeah.
How much time did you spend down there before you left? And what was your...
You mean at that particular anchorage?
Yeah.
Just a night.
Oh, I mean at the island, sorry.
At Conception?
Yeah. Or no, at...
Rum Key?
When you got to Rum Key, yeah, sorry.
I think we spent the better part of a week. You have to realize, I don't know how much you want to get into this idea of process. I mean, there was another... I had known about the story in its different evolutions for a lot of years. Remember, I'd been going to this island for almost 20 years. And even after the bad stuff took place, I knew about it for a bunch of years. And I knew I wanted to write about it. But, there's something about writing, at least for me. Like, say I wanted to write something about you, and I'm looking at you, you're a good-looking guy. You have a beard, you're very handsome.
Thank you.
But I might say it would be very cool to write about Victor. He's wearing this Brooklyn Fishing Club, and I know something about his life, and there's certain kinky things that he does, and maybe I'll write about them. It'll be a great thing. But then, I'm looking at you, and I can't do it. But then what might happen is I might turn to the left and look at you out of a corner of my eye. So I'm not looking at you straight on, but I'm looking at you just like this. Try to imagine like the way Picasso draws a painting sometimes. He doesn't look straight at the subject. Sometimes he does, but sometimes he looks out of the corner of his eye. And I could look at you out of the corner of my eye, and I might not have been able to get into the story of you when I was looking directly at you. But when I'm looking at you out of the corner of my eye, all of a sudden, whoa, I see an entry point. Does that make any sense to you?
It does, yeah.
Yeah. So with this particular book, I tried to write it. I couldn't get it right. And then, I don't want to make too big a digression here, but like about 3 years ago, I decided to write a screenplay. I'd never written a screenplay before. I had a story idea, and I had a couple friends that were movie producers. They liked the idea, so I devoted 2 years to writing the screenplay. I didn't know shit about writing screenplays. So I had to study screenplays. I had to study it. I had to realize, I discovered that, like, when you write a screenplay, you don't have flashbacks. You have to keep the action moving. You don't write, like, long, flowery sentences. I learned a lot of things like that. And after I wrote the screenplay, I went back and looked at the material that I'd had in mind for Deepwater Blues, and it was just like looking at you out of the side of my eye. I could write it then. So,
that's awesome. I'm definitely going to talk to you more offline about your writing process.
Sure.
It always fascinates me with writers, what they do, because a lot goes into it, and it's not easy. And one of the other questions I had about the book, before we move on to some personal stories about fishing, is there anything that got edited out that you really wanted to keep in there, or were you kind of happy with the way it got edited?
No, I published it just the way I wanted it.
Perfect.
I was very lucky. I have had experiences before, where every writer does, where you turn in a manuscript and the editor kind of wants to screw with it a little bit, take this out, take the other thing out. I mean, I don't know. At the risk of seeming, how shall I put this? Out of joint with the Me Too movement. One time I wrote a piece for the New York Times Magazine about a sailboat that was anchored off Cat Cay in the Bahamas, and there was a French lady and her boyfriend that were on the sailboat, and a sort of mini hurricane came through, and when the hurricane came through, the boyfriend was in the water, setting the anchor by hand.
Yeah.
It was only 25 or 30 feet, so it wasn't hard for him to get down, and she was in the back of the sailboat, but she was undressed. She didn't have clothes on. She was sunbathing, right? And while she was trying to anchor the boat and he was in the water, the anchor pulled and the sailboat took off in the 30-mile-an-hour wind, and he couldn't catch up to it. And so he was adrift for like 3 days. Actually, he survived, which is part of why the story is a great story, I think. And she survived also. But it was like a miracle for both of them that they found one another after the storm passed. But when I turned it in, my editor at the New York Times Magazine said, "But why do you have to have her nude in the sailboat when the anchor pulls?" I said, "Because she was nude." I mean, she was nude. What do you want me to do? Put a winter coat on her, goose down? And we argued about it. Yeah. I won that argument. I easily could have lost. Probably today I would have lost the argument.
Yeah.
But no, this story went in the way I wrote it.
That's cool. So let's hear a little bit about some of your fishing experiences. When we first spoke, we shared our love for trolling the deep, for billfish and just trolling in general, how it's therapeutic. And, there are a lot of listeners I know who are like, man, trolling, it's boring, this and that. But there are some people that love it. I think especially when you're doing it on your own boat, you don't have a professional captain, a first mate setting out all the lines. I find that aspect of trolling a lot more exciting, because when guys are doing all the work, and I'm just thinking, for an example, like trolling for stripers, we put out some mojo lures, spoons, whatever it is, and you sit back and wait, but you're not really putting the lures out yourself on these chartered trips. But when you're doing it on your own, I mean, I don't own my own boat, but when I troll on like my friends' boats, I love it, because it's like you did every aspect of it. And it's not like people think it's an easy way to catch fish, but it isn't always, right?
Oh man, you've touched on some very important elements in that last paragraph or two. First of all, if you're fortunate enough, if you're blessed enough to be able to have your own boat and to be able to fish on your own boat, it's just exponentially greater. I mean, I have fished on charter boats in my life, and exactly as you put it, I mean, like, they handle the lines. If you get a strike, they want to strike the fish because they don't want to lose the fish, and they hand you the rod. If you're out there doing it yourself, it's just like, it's a spiritually high experience. It's just the greatest, and I've been able to, I'm blessed that I've been able to do this my whole life. I started out with small boats. I started with a 10-footer when I was 9 years old, and then when I was 15 years old, my dad bought me a 14-footer, and then I started fishing with my wife out of a 20-foot Seacraft, and then I had a 24-foot blackfin, and then I got the Hatteras, and those fishing experiences have been just so rare. I was thinking about we were talking about striped bass, right? Mm-hmm. I do want to tell you one story about striped bass. Shall I tell you?
Absolutely, yeah.
Striped bass are there's something spiritual about a striped bass to me. I mean, they are the most beautiful. They're maybe not the most beautiful, but they're a beautiful looking fish. And the thing about a striped bass is it looks like a fish, right? I mean, it looks like a fish. And when you catch a striped bass, you just feel so great. Although having said that, they're not pound for pound great fighters, but it's great to catch them. And when I started fishing for striped bass, and this would be true about marlin fishing, for example, for me, or tuna fishing, when I started fishing for striped bass, I didn't have a clue. I didn't know how to catch them. And for the first few seasons that I fished out of my own boat, I mean, I don't even know if I caught one. I mean, I didn't know that you had to fish the tides. I didn't know what you should use. For all of these fish, there are certain basics that you have to know. And if you know the basics, and then you can refine off the basics, it's like playing a musical instrument. All of a sudden you can play music. And then if you stay at it, you can play music very, very well. But for 2 or 3 years, I didn't catch any striped bass, but I just stayed at it. My wife, who's a great fisherman, she loves it, Bonnie, and we fished together. She loved it. And then I caught, and then I got the hang of it. And after 4 or 5 years, we'd fish the tides. We'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, fish the tides, and we'd fill the boat with striped bass. And we supported our fishing by selling the striped bass at the fish market. And on Martha's Vineyard, there's a tournament called, the Striped Bass and Bluefish Derby. And even back then, there were between 10 and 12,000 people that were fishing it every year. And I fished it, and I won a few daily prizes. And then one year, I was fishing the tournament, and a friend of mine said that there are these moss bunkers. We were fishing on a Martha's Vineyard, and they said that there are these moss bunkers that are schooling up in New Bedford, which was about a 25 or 30 mile run across the Vineyard Sound from my boat. I had, my boat was pretty quick. I could cruise at 30 knots. So I ran across there with a friend of mine, a big barrel on the boat with an aerator. And we caught, 2 or 3 dozen moss bunkers. We brought them back, and we went to a territory where there were 20 or 30 boats fishing near Menemsha, which is the port that I fished out of on Martha's Vineyard. And put one of these things in the water as a live bait, and immediately hooked a large bass and caught it. Put another one out, caught another one. And we fished for 2 hours, and we caught 15 striped bass over 40 pounds. And one was 54 pounds.
Wow.
And it won the Striped Bass Bluefish Derby,
Nice.
First place. But
That's amazing. That's an amazing accomplishment.
But the part of the story that stays with me is that, I have a picture of myself standing on the dock next to these 14 bass over 40 pounds, all females. And I looked at it. I looked at it like, I can't remember. Was it 6 months later or 2 years later? And I said, "What the hell did you do, Waitzkin? You caught 14 female bass over 40 pounds to put them on the dock and sell them for a few $100s. All these females that could have spawned thousands and thousands of bass. And the truth is, I've never really fished for bass since then. That's a perfect story. I have fished a couple times since then. I went out with my brother-in-law's boat. We caught some bass, and let them go. But I had no more taste for catching large striped bass after that, because I felt like I'd sinned. Yeah,
I can relate a little bit. There's a lot of controversy right now around the striped bass. And as someone who runs a fishing club, I'm constantly in the middle of that controversy because it is the most popular fish to catch around here.
A great fish.
A great fish. And you've got guys that want to take some for the table. You've got guys that all they want to do is catch and release. And there's a big divide right now. So I kind of have to, it's tough making everybody happy because I don't make the regulations, and I wish I had more influence on it. But unfortunately, the regs are the way they are. And if a guy wants to take his one fish and it happens to be a 50+ pound fish, like I can't tell him not to do that.
Nor would I. Nor would I. My story is very personal, and even in retrospect, I probably would have taken the 54 pounder. But when I think of killing all of those large fish in one day, I just feel like I crossed a line. I was young. I wouldn't do that again. But I would never tell one of your members that he shouldn't take a bass.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't either.
I'm a fisherman.
Yeah, our whole thing is as long as you follow the regs, whatever they are for whatever fish, That's cool.
Yeah.
You know, we've got like 3 basic rules in the club since we started. One is if you kill a fish, you got to eat it.
Right.
Leave the place you fished cleaner than you found it, if possible. And without a picture, it didn't happen. We don't believe your fish tales.
Those are beautiful rules.
And those were the 3 rules that the whole club was founded on. But yeah, let's hear about some of your marlin catches and hear about some of the crazy stuff you've seen out in the deep, because I know you've logged thousands, if not more, hours, tens of thousands, hundreds.
A lot of hours.
A lot of hours out there.
Well,
right?
you know, I'll tell you one marlin story. You know, I told you we were fishing in the southern Bahamas, and the best fishing that I ever did was off I'm not going to name the island, just because I'm going to leave that water pristine. But there's an island way in the south, almost as far as the Turks and Caicos, and there's no marina there, you know. But there's an anchorage. There's a place where you can get in the lee of the island and anchor for the night. And on my old boat, if I just run at trolling speed, if I don't run fast, I can stay out for 10 days, even running the generator, and then I have to go someplace to get fuel again. So every summer we would go to this island, and we'd fish there for 2 weeks. I'd run back once to get fuel and then come back again. And we always caught fish. I mean, like one summer we caught 8, one summer we caught 18. You know, we always did well there. And maybe you'd see one boat there or you wouldn't see any boats there. So it was like you owned it. It was like you owned a patch of God's water. And one day I was fishing there with my son and my wife and my daughter, and she was a terrific angler, little woman, you know, 100 pounds, but she was really good, and her boyfriend, and we were fishing off the island, and I was on the bridge, and I looked down, and oh my God, a fin cut across the stern of the boat, and I mean it was like, you know, I don't know, it's like 4 feet out of the water. I mean, all of a sudden it looked like 4 times the size of a marlin. And I thought, oh my God. And then I realized it had the flat line. It had grabbed one of our 80-pound test rigs, and it was going to China. And my daughter was on the rod. And this was like circa 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And she started to fight it. And it was obviously a brute of a fish, and she fought it. And now it's about 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. The sun's coming down low. And we've got the double line, you know, on the reel. So the fish is about 15 or 20 feet behind the boat now, and it's finning out. We can see it. And my son, who's the deckhand, you know, is leaning off the transom of the boat to try to grab the wire leader. You can't touch anything until you can grab the wire leader, or it's not an official catch, right? So she's still got about, say, 10 or 15 feet of double line out before the wire leader comes to the boat, and he's leaning out so he can kind of grab the wire leader. The idea being that as soon as he grabs the wire leader, you know, we'll pull it to the boat and take a shot, cut the wire leader, and let him go. On a smaller marlin, we take the hooks out. But on a fish this big, it would have been very hard to do that, because you can't lift the head up. It's just too heavy. And he's leaning out to get the wire, and leaning, he's almost got it, and the fish starts to go again. And he goes down, 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 until he's 3,000 feet down. 3,000 feet down. And then he stops going. And she starts to bring the fish up, 6 inches at a time. You know, so all she can do is bring up 6 inches at a time. This is at 7 o'clock at night. By 10 o'clock at night, so we started at 3:30 in the afternoon. It's 10 o'clock at night now. And we have the fish to the side of the boat. And it's dead. It had died at 3,000 feet.
Sounded, right?
Sounded and died.
Yeah.
And we grabbed the bill. We pulled it in the boat. The head was in the stateroom. The tail was at the tuna door. And I have to tell you, I mean, truth be told, I was thrilled because it was the biggest fish I've ever put in the boat. And my kids were miserable because they'd killed this large fish. I mean, they were so upset. And so it was very strange emotionally on the boat, like this cacophony of emotions,
Like you're all happy.
Yeah.
That you can tell that they're sad, so you don't want to act too happy.
Exactly. And we got it into the island, and it was a primitive place. People came out in a more than a skiff, like a 17-footer, and they somehow got the marlin in the boat. We brought it in, and it weighed in at 800 pounds plus. And
what's the length on that?
The length would have been about 13 and a half feet. And it was an incredible fish. And again, I feel, every time people ask me, I still feel glad we caught the fish. And my kids feel miserable we caught the fish. I mean, at this stage of my life, frankly speaking, I also feel guilty about killing big fish. I mean, when I catch a big fish, I want to let it go.
Yeah.
Unless we're going to eat it.
Yep.
So, but that was like the great marlin story.
Yeah. That's a good one. It sounded, what was that, like 7 hours of battle?
Yeah.
That's crazy. Have you ever battled one longer than that?
No.
Or been on a boat?
No, but I will say this, that like when I graduated, when I finished graduate school, I took a teaching job on St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands because there's great marlin fishing there. Where else would you want to teach literature? Well, there's great marlin fishing, right? And there was a sea captain there. His name was Tommy Gifford, and Tommy Gifford was, in the history of fishing, he was one of the greatest captains that ever lived, and he taught me how to marlin fish. This was before the experiences that I'm narrating about, about the Bahamas. I mean, this was at the beginning, and with two other guys, I bought an old 31-foot Bertram, and it was for $10,000. Each of us threw in $3,000, and we must have lost 20 blue marlin because I didn't know how to catch them. I just didn't. It's like it's hard to, if you don't know what you're doing, it's hard to catch them.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what I was doing, so we lost one after the next, but it was wonderful.
That's crazy. When did you finally get one?
We caught one. I remember we caught one and brought it in. It was a 250-pound blue marlin that a college football player caught on my boat.
Nice.
And he said to me at the time, I never believed that fishing could be so violent as this. That's what he said.
Hey man, it does get bloody. It does get intense out there, right?
Yeah.
In terms of losing fish, are there any that still haunt you to this day?
Many. I mean, I think that a lot of game fishermen would say this. It's the ones that you lose that haunt you. One that comes to my mind, particularly, is we were fishing in the southern Bahamas off this island called Long Island, just like Long Island here, except there's another island, very long island, a couple hundred miles long. We were fishing off the southern tip, very, 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 very rough. And most of the yellowfin tuna we'd catch there were like 50-pounders, 60-pounders. Not big, like in Central America, a lot of the yellowfins are 120 pounds. But we didn't catch them that big in the Bahamas. And we hooked a tuna, and it was a brute. Again, we're not talking about we're not talking about a bluefin tuna, which is a 1,000-pounder. We're talking about a yellowfin tuna. It was a brute, and we fought it for a long time. We got it to the side of the boat, and my daughter's boyfriend, who loved fishing, but he had this attitude that like all fish were like striped bass and bluefish, So it was his job to put the gaff in the fish. My son wired it, and it was a yellowfin that weighed in the direction of 200 pounds. And he put the gaff in it, and with one hand. And the fish took the gaff away and took off and broke the line. I often think about that fish.
That's crazy.
I think about that fish.
What was the reaction on the boat like after
Everyone
that?
was furious at him. My son wanted to throw him in the water.
Did your daughter break up with him after that?
She broke up with him, but not because of that.
I'm sure it was one of the factors, though. That's crazy. What besides that story you told about the lemon shark getting your fin, have there ever been any other dangerous situations that you found yourself in while at sea?
One time we almost lost the boat. We were anchored off an atoll 50 miles to the south of a remote a remote Bahamian island. And it was an atoll that I'd heard about. I mean, there was nothing there. It's a coral reef in the middle of the ocean, kind of a horseshoe coral reef. And in front of the coral reef, there's a tiny little island. I mean, like, the island is about the size of this lovely studio that we're sitting in with one palm tree on it. And we arrived there in the evening, and I, you know, I was with my crew and again with my my daughter's boyfriend and Josh, my wife, and a friend of mine. And we decided to anchor off the island. And I kind of thought we would anchor about 60 yards offshore. But this friend of mine, who's very aggressive, a hard person to say no to, said, "No, you don't anchor here. Let's get close to the island so it's an easy swim in." And against my better judgment, we did that. So we ran up to about 30 or 40 yards off the island, dropped the hook, and got ready for a great dinner of lobster and broiled fish, mahi-mahi, and had a few beers. And my daughter's boyfriend goes up to the bridge to check things out and comes in, and we're all partying and drinking a little bit and enjoying ourselves. And he said, "Freddie, holy shit, the boat's turned around the other way. We're on the beach." The wind had come around with a line squall. So in other words, instead of blowing offshore, we're blowing inshore, and we were too close inshore. So we're somehow, the stern of the boat is in the breakers on the beach, and somehow we haven't hit a rock or a coral head. And we're truly in the middle of nowhere, Victor. I mean, in the middle of nowhere. I mean, like a place you wouldn't see a boat in 3 weeks. And I get up on the bridge, and I say, "Oh my God." And I'm calling to my son and daughter through the wind to get rid of the anchor, cut it. And my son gets a machete, somehow gets on the bow, almost falls over the side, cuts the line, and then we have to try to get out off the island, when I've got 10-foot breakers breaking over the boat now, without tangling the props in the anchor line, because if we tangle up, we'll founder. And, someone's going to die, or we're all going to die. Who knows if we ever get it to the island, or if anyone would ever find us. Somehow we got through. And we idled around the night. It settled down. And the next morning, we decided to go back for the anchor. It was a big hammerhead circling the anchor. But we waited until
the sharks love you, man.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. But Josh, my son dove, and we got the anchor back up, and that was the closest I've ever come to losing the boat.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. What's like,
But the moral to that story.
Yeah.
Which some of your members that have boats or little boats or bigger boats might appreciate, and it's kind of like one of my mantras on the sea. Like I know what I can do as a captain. Now I don't know what you can do as a captain, but I know what I can do as a captain. So if it's blowing 25 out of the northeast, and I feel uncomfortable about going, I won't go. You might not feel uncomfortable about going, because maybe you can handle it, or your boat can handle it, but I won't go. I don't let anyone bully me anymore. In other words, I know what my boat can do and what I can do as the captain. A captain that's somewhat more experienced than I am, that does it full time, could maybe take more of a risk than I would. If I navigate at night, for example, there are certain islands that I feel very comfortable going into at night. There are other islands where I don't feel comfortable going in at night. You might, but I don't. So I do what I feel that I know I can pull off. I think that's a rule that's very sound for a captain to embrace.
Would you say you embrace that rule fully after that experience?
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
The last question I'd like to ask you would be around what personal sacrifices have you made along the way to achieve your level of success, both in the world of writing and fishing?
Really good question. funny. Let me give you a somewhat lengthy answer to that question, if it's okay. You know how I started with all of this is that when I was 12 or 13 years old, my mother took a copy of Life magazine with Ernest Hemingway's copy of The Old Man and the Sea and put it down in front of me. And she said, read this. And I read it. And before I finished that great short novel, I knew that in life I wanted to be a fisherman and I wanted to write. I wasn't sure yet that my career would be that as a writer, but I was intoxicated by the way he wrote his sentences and the way the sentences in that book kind of relate to the ocean, the shortness of the sentences and the rhythms of the sentences. So when you ask about the sacrifice, it doesn't really feel like a sacrifice to me. You know, like right now, I'm about 6 months finished with Deepwater Blues, and the big sorrow in my life right now is that I'm not writing another book, because I'm happiest when I'm writing a book, you know, and I'm happy when I go fishing, when I can afford to go fishing, and when I can get on the boat and I can take the time and I can find the crew that I enjoy and I go fishing. So I don't think of the fishing as a sacrifice. I mean, I'm not a wealthy man, you know. I'm okay, and I'm grateful for that, and I certainly over the years have spent a disproportionate amount of my annual income on my fishing life. But I've never thought of it as a sacrifice. I mean, what would I have rather had? A fancy Mercedes car rather than going fishing? No, of course not. I'd much rather go fishing.
Yeah.
And likewise, I mean, is there anything I would have enjoyed doing more than writing books that I believe in? No. So I don't see it that way.
That's awesome. And you got your whole family into it.
Yeah.
So it's not like you have to, sneak away to go do it. It's like everybody wants to go with you.
Well, they used to. Now it's harder to round them up, so I take some friends.
I got you. Well, listen, we're about at time. I really appreciate you coming on the show today, Fred. Everybody, please go out, check out Deepwater Blues. It's a great novel.
Can I add one more thing about
absolutely,
that?
Yeah, go for it.
It's great to, at the risk of hyping something, it's great to buy it on Amazon because, first of all, there's always a discount. And, you can buy it in the regular print version, or you can buy it in the Kindle version, which is very popular. And there's an audio version, which is beautiful as well. Sometimes they offer incredible sales, too.
Yeah. But either way, whatever you prefer, whether read it on a tablet, getting the actual physical copy, which is what I always prefer, go out there and get yourself a copy. It's a great read, great novel that anybody who loves water, like Fred said earlier, will definitely enjoy reading it. Thank you to all of our listeners, all of our followers on Instagram at Brooklyn Fishing Club. Like I said earlier in the intro, we're launching our updated website. It's got the online store with new apparel. We've got new benefits for members coming in 2020. Got an ice fishing tournament coming up. I know a lot of people are excited about ice fishing this winter. So if you're living in New York City and you're trying to go fishing, join the club. You get a ton of benefits. You get a package filled with gear, shirts, koozies, a hat, a beanie, stickers, measuring tape, everything you would need to go out and rep Brooklyn Fishing Club and catch fish in style. And we'll be back with another podcast episode as soon as possible. And Fred, thank you again, man, for coming on the show. We really appreciate it, and I know our listeners do too.
Victor, thanks for inviting me. I've really loved this talk. Thanks so much, man.